I want to begin with today's lecture, Evidences for Evolution. Evidences for Evolution. So everybody put your quiz up so we can get started. The evolution story, the highlights of it, you must remember. There's our picture for the day. Let's review. All right, we are studying evolution and we are calling it what? We're calling it a doctrine, and I want you to state it, and it's 4 tenets. That will be on the test. You're probably going to see it in another quiz. But also, if we try to bring evolution into the realm of science, what do we call it? Remember, I don't think it should be called a theory. Maggie, what should we call it? A paradigm. So we are studying the evolutionary paradigm, and we began studying what does evolution teach? What is the evolution story? Begins with cosmic evolution that explains cosmic evolution, attempts to explain the origin of the universe, and that is the Big Bang Theory, anywhere from 15 to 20 billion years ago. So we're talking about 15 billion years ago. Then we have the formation of stars. And the next thing we're concerned with is the collapse and explosion of stars, which forms the planets, the so-called stellar collapse. And that, according to evolution, was about 4.6 billion years old to give us the age of the Earth. All right, then, what form of chance gave us the first biomolecules in an attempt for organic evolution? Remember, organic evolution is an attempt to explain life and its complexities. That's organic evolution. What chance? Yes?
The biochemical relay.
Yes, the biochemical relay in the primordial soup. All right, you will see that again. Then we talked about the first animals evolving in the oceans, in the water. The fish were the first vertebrates. I forgot the Cambrian explosion. Okay, all these complex invertebrates all at once, about 575 million years ago. Then what animal dominated the Earth? The dinosaur. About 65 million years ago, however, its luck ran out with probably some type of large meteor impact. All right, then we supposedly branched off or split off from the great apes of Africa. We did not descend from monkeys, according to evolution. That's oversimplifying. We split off from some unknown common ancestor. We're one branch. Your apes are another branch. Your monkeys are another branch. So don't tell an evolutionist that they teach that we evolved from monkeys. That is not correct. We branched off along with monkeys from some unknown primate-like ancestor. That's how evolution works, okay? So you don't want to state things incorrectly. You want to know what they teach so that you can argue against it without being dismissed out of hand because you don't know what you're talking about, okay? So let's begin with what I'm going to call 6 evidences. Last section we had 7 tenets. This section we have 6 evidences. What does that tell you? I want you to memorize these, to be very familiar with them. These are the same pillars of evolution that are used to support it over and over and over again. These are the main supports of the evolutionary theory, or the main pillars of the evolutionary paradigm. You need to know them. We're going to spend 2 lectures on this. Today we are going to cover the first 2. All right, so you see the 6 evidences. These are facts, some of them. Some of them are fallacies. Some of them are misrepresentations. Some of them are just plain assumptions that are part of the evolutionary paradigm. So the first thing is that the Earth is billions of years old. Is that a proven fact of science? No. The next thing that comes up, and this one comes up in pretty much in these order in the order that I have here. The fossil record. What about the fossil record? The evidence is that the fossil record documents evolutionary change. It documents a simple to complex progression. Make sure you answer things correctly and specifically. If I ask you for an evidence and you write down fossil record, I'm going to write, what about it? So according to evolution, and as presented, according to evolution, the fossil record documents descent with modification. Let's back up for just a second. I asked you previously about the evolution of evolution. How did the word change? And what is the common usage of the word evolution? In typical conversation, the word evolution refers to organic evolution, doesn't it? And in typical conversation, the word evolution refers to descent with modification or change over time. Okay, change over time. And what kind of change are they talking about? They're talking about the evolution of all the different species that we see around us, whether they're plants, animals, or humans. So the fossil record documents evolution, is used as an evidence. Next, similar structures are evidence of common ancestry. Are there similar structures? Of course there are. But the evidence is that these similar structures are evidence of common ancestry or evidence of descent with modification. What does evolution mean to a typical evolutionist? Descent with modification. Those are the three we're going to talk about today. The remaining three we will talk about on Thursday. So we're going to begin then with the first three evidences. Notice for each one of them I have something I want you to associate with them. The first evidence is that the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. The Earth is billions of years old. That is not a proven fact of science. It is an assumption in the evolutionary paradigm. So the first evidence we're going to classify as an assumption. It is not a proven fact of science that the Earth is 4.6 billion years. Then the fossil record documentation. Does the fossil record document an upward progression of simple to complex? Does the fossil record contain transitional forms? Does the fossil record document evolution? The answer is no. This is actually a fallacy. It's simply not true. The evidence for evolution is simply not in the fossil record. One way we know this is that we had an alternate mechanism of evolution proposed by Stephen Gould. What's that alternate mechanism? Punctuated equilibrium. Why did that gain any popularity at all when it's actually kind of ridiculous that we could have huge jumps of evolutionary change? How did that even become credible in science? The fossil record does not contain the transitional forms. The fossil record does not document this. This is one of evolution's best kept secrets, is that not only does the fossil record not document evolution, they don't use it. Why don't they use it? Because it doesn't have anything for them, okay? And the third one that we're talking about today is similarity. Similar structures are evidence of common ancestry. We're going to classify this as a misinterpretation. Are there similar structures in the animal kingdom, in the plant kingdom? Of course there are. But that doesn't mean that they came from a common ancestor. They came from a common designer, common person, and they have common similar uses, so the structures are similar. That does not prove anything. Let's begin with evidence number one. The Earth is billions of years old. I'm going to go through this one quickly because we're going to deal with it in detail in the geology section in the next portion of this class. But we will talk about how do they base this? What do they use for the science behind it? First of all, it is an assumption It's not proven. It's an assumption that we normally would call uniformitarianism. And that has the idea that the processes that we see going on the Earth's surface today are the same processes occurring at the same rates that shape the geological features of the Earth. Uniformitarianism has the idea, it has a famous quote, the present is the key to the past. So we can try to figure out the origin of the Earth by looking at the geological processes we can observe today. That's uniformitarianism. So the only way we can shape the geological structures that we see on the Earth today would be a lot of what? Time. So we need the Earth to be this old. The second thing they're going to base the age of the Earth on is radiometric dating. You've heard of that. Radiometric dating, also radiocarbon dating. Radiometric dating is a way to measure decay of radioactive elements in rocks that make up the Earth's crust. That's radiometric dating. We measure the rate of decay and we extrapolate backwards and say this rock has to be 4 billion years old. This rock has to be 2.5 billion years old. Well, that's based on a lot of assumptions and you're taking a lot of liberty by calculating back that far. That's radiometric dating. Radiocarbon dating is a little different. It's used for dating fossils, things that were at one time alive. So there's two kinds of dating. Radiometric, dating the rocks of the Earth's crust, and radiocarbon, dating fossils themselves. So we will talk about those in detail. We'll spend a whole lecture on radiometric dating. This is an assumption, it's not evidence. We just assume the Earth to be this old because of the radiometric dating and because we need the Earth to be this old. All right, and the age of the Earth, it has been established by different radiometric means and other things. However, the age of the Earth was determined to be very, very old even before radiometric dating was possible. Evidence number 2 is the fossil record, something that we will also deal with in more detail when we cover geology. This section I'm dealing mostly with organic evolution. And so not the age of the Earth, not the fossil record so much. But this is a fallacy. It's simply not true. We can't trace evolution very efficiently at all in the fossil record. The fossil record does not support gradualism. Okay? If we go back to both of these evidences at the same time, this is all according to the evolutionary paradigm. So according to the evolutionary paradigm, how old is the Earth? 4.6 billion. What's the alternate paradigm? The creation, flood, fall, biblical view of origins. That paradigm, according to the biblical paradigm, how old is the Earth? Definitely less than 10,000, somewhere around 6,000. Okay, because we have about 6,000 years of biblical history. So what are you going to trust? The evolutionary paradigm with its radiometric dating and assumptions, or the fossil record as interpreted by the evolutionary paradigm that we had all these millions of years of death and destruction? Did we have millions of years of death and destruction, or do we have about 6,000 years as in the biblical history? And part of that 6,000 year history would include what? The flood. So the flood is our best explanation for the fossil record, which is what we'll talk about. Though for right now, what do we see in the fossil record? We see death and destruction, animals, plants buried throughout the globe in different locations. They're all buried together, they're all mixed up, or we'll find bits and pieces here and bits and pieces there. We're not seeing the progression of simple to complex. Evolutionists will claim that there is a chronological appearance of fossils, starting with the most primitive fossils at the bottom, and then gradually, as you work your way up, you're going to see a progression of simple to complex. Well, how were the fossils buried? They were buried by habitat. They were of course, there are some simpler animals that will be buried first, and your more larger animals, they're not going to be buried as easily or as quickly. So the fossil record does not show the chronological appearance as claimed. Yes?
What is their explanation for the forming of fossils?
The fact that you have, their explanation is vague, and they have a lot of explanations where they'll show pictures, cartoons even, where they'll show a fish. And the fish dies and it goes to the bottom and it's gradually buried by sediment and it gets compacted and it becomes a fossil. That doesn't happen very often. That's why we need the millions and millions of years. Because what happens when a fish dies? It decays. In fact, does it settle on the bottom or does it float? It floats, it decays, it's eaten, and so on and so forth.
It needs a rapid burial.
It absolutely needs a rapid burial, and so they're going to ignore a lot of things like that. And they have very selective evidence, okay? This is a picture of a massive burial of a lot of different dinosaurs all at once. And in fact, they look very amphibian-like if you look right here. That looks very similar to a frog skull to me. But what we want to talk about is what is in the fossil record. Can we try to step back and take a look at it? Part of the problem with is we're going to interpret our evidence in light of our paradigm. So you want to try, when you're arguing against evolution, to try to look at it, it's not really possible, but try to look at it a little bit more objectively as much as possible. The fossil record. What is in the fossil record? This is a fact. Stability and distinction of species. That's important. Stability and distinction of species. What in the world do I mean by that? I mean that we have fossils in the fossil record that are there. They're a certain kind of animal, and they don't, what? Change. They appear in the fossil record. There they are. They're the same. And many of them are the so-called living fossils, where you can find a corresponding species alive today with very little difference, especially in the plant kingdom. There's very little evidence of plant evolution. What we see in the fossil record with respect to plants is a change in size and not much else. Okay, so plants are not going to be touted in the fossil record. That's important. What is actually in the fossil record? Stability and distinction of species. That means that the animals in the fossil record are separate and distinct species that do not, what? Change. Important fact. The animals in particular and the plants in the fossil record are separate and distinct species, and they do not change. I'll say that a third time because you need to know what's in the fossil record. What's in the fossil record with respect to transitional forms? There aren't any. Animals and plants in the fossil record are separate and distinct species that do not change. We are missing the transitional forms. So what's in the fossil record? Stability and distinction of species. The second thing we see in the fossil record is death and destruction. Massive death and destruction. There's all kinds of so-called fossil graveyards. There's a large fossil graveyard in the Gobi Desert, where we have 25 different theropod dinosaurs, 200 different kinds of mammal skulls. Oh, wait a minute. I thought dinosaurs predated the mammals. I thought dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. Another problem in the fossil record would be that we have found bone marrow in fossilized dinosaur bones. Do you think bone marrow, which is a soft tissue, can survive fossilization processes? It can, but is going to survive being in the ground for 65 million years? No. Okay, yes?
Would they ever try to use the meteor hitting and then burying the fossils? Would they ever try to use that as a...
No, I think they don't use it as a fossil formation. They use it as a reason to explain death. But yes, in some respects also. But it does require rapid burial. And so fossil formation can be a big problem. Okay, so we will deal with fossils a whole lot. So what I want you to know is what two things do we actually see in the fossil record? We see separate and distinct species that do not change. And we see a lot of death and destruction, often on a large scale. So if we use their little fairy tale of the fish gradually being buried in sediment, it does not explain what's in the fossil record. And fossil formation does not happen like that. That's why they have to come up with these small catastrophes and these tar pits and all these other things. Does fossilization happen like that? It might if there's some type of mudslide, but the rapid burial is required. So what is not in the fossil record? Two things we see in the fossil record, and now two things we do not see. There it is. Transitional forms are not found in the fossil record. What do we see? We see death and destruction. We see separate and distinct organisms that do not change. We might see something that's touted as halfway between reptile and bird and so forth. It's just an odd reptile or possibly an odd bird. If you think about it, how many animals are alive today that do not fit our little categories of classification? Can you think of an animal that doesn't fit our classification scheme? Are there outliers, animals that don't fit? Yes. There's the duck-billed platypus. It lays eggs, but it is a mammal. It is classified as a mammal because it has the main mammal characteristic of nursing the young and the hair or fur, but it doesn't reproduce like other mammals. Does that mean it's an in-between species? No, it means it's an odd mammal. There's a lot of things that don't fit very well into our little pigeonholes that we've created, because remember that God is an infinite creator and there's infinite variety. So we do not see the transitional forms. We see stability and distinction of species, separate and distinct animals and plants that do not change. We do not see order or progression. We do not see the simple to complex order that evolution would require. We see a jumbled mess, which would be indicative of the Genesis flood. We don't see that. We don't see a nice chronological appearance of simple animals to complex animals. We see fragments scattered all over the globe. We see marine animals on the mountains in Pennsylvania, kind of far from the ocean. All kinds of things. The fossil record fails the evolutionists. Evidence number 3, you're going to be less familiar with this one, so you're going to need to study this. Similar structures are evidence of common ancestry. Evidence number 3, similar structures are evidence of common ancestry. This we are classifying as a misinterpretation. Are there similar structures between animals? Of course there are. Things that have similar function have similar shapes, okay? Things that have animals that are in the same category, like the vertebrates, will they have similar structures, in particular similar bone structures? Of course they do. But how you interpret that depends solely on your paradigm. This is what is actually used in evolutionary lineages. It's called homology. Homology, also called comparative anatomy. This is an important point. The fossil record does not work very well. The fossil record doesn't give us a nice documentation. So what we do is we trace our evolutionary pathways through homology or comparative anatomy. We compare different animals, see how they're alike, and say, okay, they're so much alike, they had to have descended from a common ancestor. Okay, keep in mind, as I said earlier, that evolutionists do not teach that we descended from monkeys or that we descended from apes. They say that we branched off from the same common ancestor as apes and monkeys and other primates. Why? What is the basis of that statement? The fact that we've seen it in the fossil record? Is that the basis of their statement? No, the basis of their statement is we're the closest looking to primates. And we have primate physiology in many aspects. We have mammalian physiology in many aspects, don't we? We were created on the same day as animals, and we have a lot of similarities in our physical makeup. Correct? That's the only reason. There is no evidence, genetically speaking, of us evolving from one common ancestor, the same common ancestor as monkeys. Are there similarities in our structure with primates? Yes. Okay. But there's also a whole lot of differences. Is there similarity in our DNA? The answer to that is it depends on how you compare the two. You've probably seen articles that we have 95% of the same DNA as chimpanzees. That's true if you count it in a certain manner, but it's not true if you count it in another manner. So that's how things get manipulated in science in general. So similar structures are evidence of common ancestry. This is a misinterpretation. It's taking something that we see and interpreting it in light of evolution. You can't use it for evolution. It's putting the cart before the horse again. Okay? And the problem with this is this is actually the way they come up with all their evolutionary trees. They get the relationships between organisms not from the fossil record, but from homology, also called comparative anatomy. So homology is the main technique used to trace evolutionary lineages, not the fossil record. Why not the fossil record? Because it's not in the fossil record. So we're going to base our evolution on itself. The best evidence for evolution is evolution itself. All we do is we're interpreting the similarities in light of our paradigm. So if I'm an evolutionist, how do I interpret similarities? I say, oh, common ancestor, look how similar these are. But I'm a creationist, and so how do I interpret that in my paradigm? How do you interpret that in your paradigm? Can you interpret it in your paradigm? Same structures were designed by the same person that have the same function. What's the big deal? Okay, so homology, also called comparative anatomy, is a misinterpretation taken solely in the light of a person's paradigm. We can take the same structures and so forth. And the other problem with it is they emphasize the similarities and do what? Downplay the differences. So I can turn it around and I can downplay the similarities and emphasize the dissimilarities. It's all interpretation. And this is the way that evolution is traced, not the fossil record. Okay, show me the evidence. I'm not finding any. All right, there are two types of similar structures. And this is the main type that they like. That's why we call it homology. There are two types. The first is homologous structures. Homologous structures. The second type is analogous structures. Okay? So let's start with I'm having pronunciation troubles today. homologous. Okay, we've got homologous and analogous structures. We'll begin with homologous. Homologous is where we get the term homology. A homologous structure is a structure found in different species that have developed from a shared evolutionary origin. So this term is defined with respect to shared evolutionary origin. What is this? It's total evolutionary terminology. Okay, a homologous structure is a similar structure found in different species, and the key to the definition is the fact that they're from a common ancestor. That's not evidence, that's just a statement that is made and taken as fact. Okay, so homologous structures are similar structures found in different species that shared a common ancestor. So we find something that's similar, we just jump to the conclusion that they had a common ancestor. Okay, we look similar physiologically to chimpanzees and apes and other primates. So we automatically jump to the conclusion that we share a common ancestor. Okay, so don't have the idea that evolution teaches, monkey, ape, man in that order. They don't teach it that way. This is an example of divergent evolution. So divergent evolution is what I've been talking about. The fact that we have a common ancestor and we branched off. That's divergent evolution. One common ancestor and branches off. Divergent. Okay? They don't teach that we have a straight line progression. Okay? It's called divergent evolution. Common ancestor, and then this branch over here eventually evolves into human beings with some dead ends along the way. This branch becomes this type of old world monkey. This branch becomes the new world monkeys. This branch becomes the great apes. Well, maybe we're closer to the great apes than we are to the new world monkeys versus the old world monkeys and so forth. That's called divergent evolution. Okay, so don't argue evolution by telling them that they believe that we evolved from monkeys. No, they believe we diverged from the same common ancestor as monkeys, not from them directly. Okay, that's called divergent evolution, and we use homologous structures to prove it. Okay, so homologous structures. I'm going to give you some examples and we're going to talk about them. One of the most famous examples of homologous structures is the mammal limb series, Darwin's favorite that he refers to in The Origin of Species. Here it is. What can be more curious than that of the hand of a man formed for grasping, that of a mole for digging, the leg of a horse, the paddle of a porpoise, the wing of a bat should all be constructed on the same pattern and should include the same bones in the same relative positions. Okay, so homology, what does it do? It stresses the similarities and downplays the differences. And just draws a conclusion that because it's similar, came from the same source. That's kind of a leap of logic. Okay, so the mammal limb series is an example of it. Let's look at this a little closer. In the mammal limb series, these are all mammal hands or feet, whatever you want to call them. The first, you can recognize the first. That is the hand of a man. Okay, and what they'll do is they'll color code all the bones, as they did in the previous thing that I showed you. See how we've got the color coding? Okay, and we're going to even name it the same thing. There's the humerus. All the purple are the humerus. That's kind of a stretch because the humerus is supposed to be a long bone. That's not a long bone. That's a irregularly shaped bone. And then we're going to have the radius and the ulna. All right, what are they doing? They're emphasizing similarities, and they're taking a leap of logic by saying that, okay, the bone structures, they have the same bones. They're in the same position. They share a common ancestor. Okay, that's what the idea of homologous structures is all about. These are in different animals. They even serve different purposes. Okay, remember what Darwin said? The hand of a man formed from grasping, that of a mole for digging, the leg of a horse, the paddle of a porpoise, and the wing of a bat. Those are all mammals. Okay, but then when we look at them in detail, we see that the similarities are a little bit of stretch. I see these are what I'm pointing at here on the hand, those are the metatarsals. Okay, this next structure here is a dog paw. Okay, I'm not seeing really metatarsals. I guess we could correlate them. This here, this is a pig. Okay, I don't know if you would consider pig's hoofs to be fingers. All right, I can't see my cursor. There it is. So the third one here is a pig hoof. Fourth one is a cow. We're kind of, see how we're stretching the actual similarities. The fifth one is a tapir, right here. Now we're kind of back to having the metatarsals. This is the horse. I think that we can go either way. We can highlight similarities and say they prove evolution, or we can highlight dissimilarities and say, this is a stretch. Okay, so is this strong evolutionary evidence? No. Okay. So this one, I can't believe they're still using this. This is from these are, right here, the drawings of a man named Ernest Haeckel. All right, and Ernest Haeckel promoted what he called the recapitulation theory. And he said that ontology, or embryo development, recapitulates phylogeny. Oh, that sounds scientific. It's the recapitulation theory. Ontology recapitulates phylogeny. What is he saying? He's saying that as embryos develop, they mimic the stages of evolution. Well, that was disproven, and nobody teaches that anymore. But guess what diagrams they still use? They just put it in a different place. They still use Ernest Haeckel's drawings, but they use it as an example of homology. Homology is not just similar structures. Homology can also be similar, well, these are similar structures in development. Okay, so we're still using Ernest Haeckel's embryology, even though that theory of recapitulation has been debunked. But there they are, still in textbooks, still all over the internet, etc. In this particular drawing, this was drawn by Ernest Haeckel. It's been rearranged a little bit. He originally had the pig in front of the rabbit, okay? But here we see this row, this first row is fish. Here's a salamander. Third row is a tortoise. Fourth row, oh, what are we doing? Fish, amphibian, reptile, bird, then the last four are mammals. What is that? It's just evolution. Did he put them in order of similarities? No, he put them in evolutionary order. So we have a fish embryo. We have the salamander embryo, the turtle embryo, the chick embryo. This one is a rabbit. Yes, after the chick is the rabbit. Then we have a cow, and you probably recognize this one. See the snout? That's a pig embryo. And last but not least, here we are, the human embryo. And they're still making a big deal out of what? What do they call these? Gill slits and a tail. This is superficial similarities, but And they make the claim then that all vertebrate embryos go through the same stages of development, therefore evolution is true, therefore we all have a common ancestor. Well, they're all vertebrates. So what they call a tail here, see the tail? Is that a tail? No, that's the beginning of the vertebrae. And if they're all vertebrates, they're going to have a vertebrae, and that vertebrae has to develop. But it looks so similar. Look. Do we have gills? Do we even have any precursor gills? No, those become the eustachian tubes. Okay, so we all have, all of these animals are vertebrates. So what's the big deal of seeing the vertebrae develop first? It is the backbone. It's not a tail. This is the backbone. So we have the vestigial organ. Oh, don't bring those up too. So here we are again going back to Ernest Haeckel in the 1800s, still using his drawings because we still are convinced that evolution is true and we're still grasping for evidence of any sort. Okay? So we're still pulling the embryo card. And they are still even pulling the giraffe card from Lamarck. Still teaching it. Still in textbooks, even though it's been debunked. Okay, the last thing is the analogous structures. These are similar structures found in different species that develop from different evolutionary pathways. Okay, so homologous has the idea of same evolutionary path. Analogous is a different evolutionary path. That's the difference between the two types of structures. Homologous equals same evolutionary pathway. Analogous equals different evolutionary pathways. So these are similar structures found in different species that develop from different evolutionary pathways. Okay, so this is similarity of structure, even though it has a different function. Now, analogous structures are different in that they came from a different ancestor. Homologous structures are the same in that they came from the same ancestor. Both of these terms are defined by evolution. Similar structures, same ancestor, we call it homologous. Different structures, different ancestor, we call it analogous. Okay? Homologous, same ancestor. All right? Analogous, different ancestor. And this is called convergent evolution. This is an accommodation. Now we have different structures forming the same function. That's a analogous structure. Similar structure found in different species that develop from different evolutionary origins. They don't correspond in structure, they correspond in function. Convergent evolution, and this is an accommodation. Oh, we don't have that branching off that we like to see. We see separate evolution of similar structures. This is a separate evolution of similar structures, and it has to be explained away. That's why I'm using this word. Here it is, accommodation. Remember, the strongest paradigm predicts the most data and has to adjust the least. A weak paradigm has to keep tweaking itself, keep adjusting to new data. This is the easiest example of an analogous structure, the evolution of the wing. It had to evolve 3 separate times. We have the bat wing. What are bats? Mammals. They share a different evolutionary pathway. They share an evolutionary pathway with different organisms. We just saw those in homology. Then we have the bird wing, and then the insect wing. So we have 3 different evolutionary pathways for something that's very similar, wings to fly. That's a thing that has to be explained away. It doesn't fit our homology that we like to use. So finally, arguments. Let's summarize the arguments against homology. Remember, homology is also called, it's also called comparative anatomy. So, the similarities exist, but their meaning depends on what? The paradigm of the scientist. As I've been saying all along, we're calling this a misinterpretation of real facts. Are there similarities? Yes. And the question is, what's the best explanation? Well, the answer is your explanation depends on your paradigm. You see similar structures as an evolutionist, you're going to interpret it as evidence for evolution. We've already decided. I'm a creationist. I see similarities. I don't have a problem with similarities. We have the same creator. And so similar structures are going to have the same underlying bone pattern. I don't have a problem with that. And even so, some of those similarities are quite stretched. So the similarities exist, but their meaning depends on your paradigm. Then number 2, the similarities exist because the organism's way of life requires the same or similar structures. All of those are mammals. Doesn't shake my faith in creation when I see that they can name the bones the same way to make it look like we share common ancestry. So here's some real problems coming up. See my last 4 questions that homology cannot answer. There's 4 of them. 4 questions that homology cannot answer. Where are the transitional forms? What would those in-between steps be? What would they look like? Oh, we have the horse series. Those are the in-between stages for the evolution of a horse. Well, the horse series has a lot of problems too, especially in number of toes. They come and go, apparently. Another question is, what is the mechanism of change? Oh, it's mutations, right? Followed by natural selection, followed by accumulation of small changes. That's the 3 steps of gradualism. The other problem, number 5, is there genetic correlation? What would those mutations be to arrive at those different structures? What would those mutations even be? How would they be selected? There's all kinds of holes in the evolutionary paradigm. And the last one is, what about analogy? What about the wings having to evolve 3 separate times? All by chance. Okay, so those are the first 3 evidences. I've spent the most time on number 3, and we will spend a lot more time on the first 2 in the next section dealing with geology. So there's our 6 evidences. Write them down if you haven't already and learn them. Today we covered the first 3. The Earth is 6 billion years old. The fossil record documents evolutionary progression. Number 3, similar structures are evidence of common ancestry. Number 4 we'll deal with on Thursday, living things are fundamentally the same. Is that true? Sure it is, but doesn't prove evolution. Number 5, diversity and variety are the result of natural selection. Talk about that on Thursday. And lastly, adaptation to environment is evolution in action. Look at number 6. Adaptation to environment. What is that? Micro, exactly. Microevolution. What's the difference, micro to macro? Microevolution occurs. It's adaptation to environment. It's within the species boundary. What we're going to argue against is macro. So does microevolution prove macro? That's going to be evidence number 6 that we'll deal with on Thursday. Okay, we'll see you then.